welcome to the main service. We are glad to have you glued to the presentation that has started from morning till this moment in time. I hope you've been blessed by the other programs that have gone by, and at this point in time, I would love to present to you the Touch of Faith, who's going to give us the special song. Thereafter, we'll have Pastor Nathan Muyambango, who will feed us with the word of hope. Stay tuned and listen to the man of God as he shares the gospel of hope.
Happy Sabbath and happy day to all of you who are watching us from all around. I do pray and hope that the Lord is blessing you and keeping you well amidst these rare and strange times that we live. This morning, I would like to invite your attention to the book of Psalm. Psalm chapter 23, reading verse 4. And I know the book of Psalm, especially chapter 23, is a verse that most of us could possibly recite from memory. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And so goes the hymn. But I want us to focus on verse 4. Verse 4 says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. God bless the reading of his word. Our message this morning is entitled, Confidence Amidst Chaos. Confidence amidst chaos. I remember vividly some years back, we were young, growing up in our mother's home. One day in the evening, in the middle of the night, something strange happened. And this is what would occur. When I woke up in the middle of the night, stepping down out of my bed, I realized that the ground was wet. I tried to switch on the light, there was no power. And as I tried to pant in the darkness, looking for solid ground where I could step, it was all water. Before I realized it, my young sisters were screaming in their bedroom because them also had been stepping on wet ground. But what is it that was happening? And it's a darkness that you can't see, so you don't know what you are dealing with. You step here, it's wet, and the water level was beginning to rise. Then we realized that it was a period of flooding. Our home was on the down slope. So all the water in the city, in our street, was headed to the down slope. And so it was fast filling in our home, and before we knew it, the water was in knee level, and before we knew it, the water was in the waist level. But then the question was, how do we retrieve the valuables? At this point, you needed to answer the question, what is the most important thing in the home? So we began to panic. Others went to lift up the TVs and putting them on top of the fridges. My mother rushed to her bedroom to go and ensure that the important documents were first secured. And each one began to pick what they counted to be very important. Number one, top of the list. My dear beloved brothers and sisters, this morning, if God was to save this world, if this world would plunge itself in chaos, untold chaos, what is it that God would pay particular attention on? I remind you of the words chronicled in the book titled Testimonies to Ministers on page 45 and page 49. The church, enfeebled and defective, needing to be reproved, needing to be warned, and needing to be cancelled, is the only object upon the earth upon which Christ bestows his supreme regard. The church is the only object upon the face of the earth, here below and above, that Jesus Christ, that God himself places his supreme regard. It's about you and I. The church is about the human race that Jesus gave himself for. If this world would give itself to untold chaos, to untold misfortune, Jesus has his watch care on his precious jewels, his children, those who profess his name. Now, my beloved brothers and sisters, the watch care of Jesus, especially in such times like we live, the time of the novel coronavirus, you begin to question yourself, really, is there a God on the throne? And some people's faith has been taken to a test. If God is really there, why do things go wrong? I am going to remind you that as we read the psalm, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. This verse also goes to tell that certainly there are going to be valleys, but get it right. A valley is not an evidence. It's not a token to confirm that the presence of God is not there. Neither does it downplay on the sovereignty of God. A hymn writer goes to say that the God of the mountain is still the God in the valley. The God of the day is still the God in the night. Beg your pardon? When things go wrong, he will make them right. So goes the famous old Negro song. The God of the mountain is still the God of the night, simply to show that God is not only a God of good times, God is a God of bad times, and what that means is that even when things are wrong, even when things don't add up, even when things fall apart, this does not even raise the question of the presence, the power, and sustaining grace of God. God is God when things are well, and God is God when things are not well. Quickly, I need to remind you, the book of Psalm is a composition of songs that were sung in the old ancient days. So all the songs put together comprise what now would become to be known as the hymn book of the Old Testament church, or the songbook of Israel. The book of Psalm was written over a period of 900 years. The first song being composed by Moses himself, which is actually Psalm chapter 90, which was composed in the year 1490 BC. And the last hymn to be composed was a hymn that was composed at the time that the children of Israel would actually go free from exile in the year 586 BC. You want to know that hymn? It's hymn number 126. So over a period of 900 years, a number of composers and hymn writers would come together. David, of the 150 hymns found in the book of Psalm, David would contribute 83 of them, and the rest was composed by the likes of the descendants of Korah, Hezekiah, Solomon, and Moses, and many others who contributed to the composition of the book of Psalm. Particularly, Psalm chapter 23 is a hymn that is credited to the prophet or king David himself. Now, this, of course, goes with the background. You know that David was a shepherd boy, isn't it? You know that David himself, when he's talking about the sheep and he's talking about the shepherd, he is speaking from the backdrop of himself having been born and bred as a shepherd in a pastoral culture. He understands what he's talking about. We know from the confession of 1 Samuel chapter 17 and reading verse 34 to 37. David would go ahead and give his CV as a shepherd boy. But David said to Saul, I quote, "Your servant has been keeping the sheep of his father, when a lion and a bear came and carried off the sheep from the flock. I went after and struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by the beard, by the hair, struck it and killed it. Your servant," referring to himself, "has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine also," referring to Goliath, "will also be done like I did to them, because he has defied the armies of the Lord." Now notice in verse 37, "The Lord who rescued me," you see the connotation of shepherding. "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the bear will rescue me also from this Philistine." Already you begin to identify, before we delve into the study of Psalm chapter 23, that David is actually infused with the experience of him having been a shepherd boy. He had been a good shepherd, protecting his sheep, and he knew the science and the mechanism of shepherding. When finally he concedes in poetry, in the Hebrew poetry, that God is his shepherd, he shall not want. He has this whole understanding of, if a shepherd, an earthly human shepherd, can be so concerned and go out of their way to sacrifice their welfare for the welfare of the sheep, what more of the great shepherd of God's people himself, the Lord God Almighty? David, he knew and was acquainted with the difficulty and the hardship and the danger in the wild, in the country, in the rock sides, by the mountainside, in the ravines, and also in the dens. David was acquainted with the rivers. He was acquainted with the landscape. He had an experience of being alone in the wild, exposed to the risk and danger of predators. David had known the landscape and the country. And if you talk about shepherding, he is the man to talk about who a shepherd is and what the sheep is and how the relationship between the two correlate. My beloved friends, David concedes that when he walks through the valley of the shadow of death, he will not fear. And the reason he will not fear, the reason he will be comforted, is because there is a shepherd. And the tokens of the shepherd being in control are exhibited in the two elements, the instruments that the ancient shepherds used to use. And this is a staff and a rod, as if to signify instruments of defense and instruments of guiding. So if the Lord is guiding and the Lord is there to protect, he has nothing to fear, even if you undergo a near-death experience. Yes, beloved of God, I want to remind you there will be valleys in our lives. There will be valleys in the experience of God's people. Certainly, there will be valleys, experiences that are bitter to chew. There will be experiences that are so perplexing, so stressing, and so downloading. Beloved of God, when those experiences do come, either on you or on your family, in your Christian experience, get it right. It is not an evidence that God has deserted you. Neither is it a confirmation that you are not in right standing with God. You see, there is this wrong theology. If things are well, you are blessed by God's good hand. And if things are bad, oh boy, it's as if God has deserted you. It's as if God is punishing you. Beloved of God, the favor, the grace of God, the sustaining power of God is not a dim light kind of relationship. If you are well, light. If you are bad, dim. You do well, light. If you fail and disappoint God, dim. God's presence is not a dim light kind of relationship. God is there. You are enjoying the summit of the mountain. It's all heyday and all is well. God is with you. God is blessing you. You are because he is. But it is also very true that when you are down in the doldrums of the valley and things cannot add up, things fall apart, God there also is there. Beloved of God, can I quickly remind you that Jesus himself boasts of being the great shepherd of his own flock. I invite now your attention to the book of John chapter 10, reading verse 10 and 11. Actually, verse 14 to 15. I am the good shepherd, Jesus says. I know my sheep, and I am known of mine. As the Father knows me, even so know I the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. Beloved of God, Jesus portrays himself to his people as a great shepherd. This is not only a phenomenon that you find in the new covenant. It's a recurring theme from time immemorial, from the creation of the world. Actually, the Apostle Paul will confirm in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, reading verse 1 to 4. Talking about the experience in the Old Testament, in the wilderness, the Apostle Paul will say in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and reading from verse 1 to 4, and I quote in the NIV version, "Moreover, brethren, I would not that you should be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and how all our fathers passed through the sea, and did eat the spiritual manna, and they did drink the spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Jesus." Apostle Paul is confirming in the Old Testament there is what is called the theophany, the appearance of the divine. And God in his manifestation and demonstration has always come to the aid of his people. In the wilderness experience, in the Exodus, in a dry and weary and thirsty land, God was the shepherd of his people when under the scorching rays of the sun, Jesus came as a cloud, by day of shade and by evening of fire to give warmth. When God's people were wandering and did not know whether to turn left or right, the cloud guided them through. When there was lack of water and lack of food and lack of basic needs, there was a rock. The rock that here is confirmed by the Apostle Paul was Jesus himself. So we see already building from the Old Testament that Jesus has been the good shepherd of his people. Their souls did not get sullen, neither did their clothes wax old, neither did they die out of hunger, because the great shepherd was there to sustain them. Beloved of God, and as we come to the New Testament, Paul describes Jesus as the great shepherd. Peter, writing to the church, describes Jesus as the great shepherd. Now, notice the terminology. Jesus says he's a good shepherd. The Apostle Paul refers to him as a great shepherd. And then Peter refers to him as a chief shepherd. In all this, to confirm that Jesus is a replica, or Jesus is the antitype. He himself is what a human shepherd represents. You talk about a human shepherd, how they go out of their way, like David, giving their lives, sacrificing their life, putting their life on the line for the sake of the sheep. Talking about a shepherd taking care of the welfare of the sheep, their diseases, treating them and leading them to green pastures and well-watered lands. All these that shepherds would do is actually a representation of what God himself, the great shepherd of his people, simply does in his relationship with human beings. Yes, beloved of God. God is not only a shepherd of the Old Testament church, neither is he a great and good shepherd of the New Testament church. God is the great shepherd of the universal family of the human race. Can I remind you of Daniel? Daniel chapter 2, in verse 21 and 22. Daniel would say, "Praise be to the name of the Lord God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his, for he changes the times and the seasons. He disposes the kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals the deep and secret things. He knows what lies in the darkness. He also knows what dwells with him." Yes, beloved of God. God is the final say, if you please, to all the events and forces of nature and all affairs of human beings. You see, human beings can manipulate their way to get their intended results, but only at the concert of God. Even the devil himself, if he should carry on his malicious activities of destroying, stealing, killing, and destroying, he also can only do so if God allows him. Beloved of God, Jesus, God himself, is on the throne. God is still in charge and in control. In the book titled Testimonies to the Church, reading in volume 5 and on page 753. In 1889, Ellen White wrote, "The world is not without a ruler. The program of coming events is in the hands of the Lord. The majesty of heaven has the destiny of nations in his hand, as well as the concerns of his church in his own church." Aren't we talking about the novel coronavirus? that has killed thousands. And I think by yesterday, the number was above 5,000 according to the report of the World Health Organization. So everyone is living in fear and uncertainty. Questions can be asked. When this dark episode finally is lifted from the world, are we, post-corona, going to return to normal? Is it going ever, the world, getting back to how things used to be? The answer could be, we can only assume. He who holds tomorrow is the one who has the final answer. You and I have nothing to worry about because he who holds our hand is the one who holds tomorrow. Beloved of God, there is nothing on the face of the earth that happens by its own self-will. God is the supreme ruler. He is the sovereign. He is the invisible power. He is the one who grants the footsteps of all forces of nature. My beloved brothers and sisters, why then, if God is all powerful, omnipresent, and he has all in his charge, why then should there even be a notion of the valley? Why then should there even be a leeway for things to go wrong? Why should it be that in the psalm there could even be a verse that talks about walking or moving, experiencing the valley? As you look at Psalm 23, it's a beautiful hymn. I personally love it, and I presume you do. But do you understand what verse 4 says? It is easy for you and I to sing and dance and leap with joy with the components of God is my shepherd. No problem with that so far. He leads me beside the still waters. No problem. He restores my soul. No problem with it. He leads me in green pastures. Everyone wants greener pastures. That's why we are going to school. That is why we are doing our businesses and doing risks. And that's why we are farming. We want greener pastures, isn't it? So in this chapter, there's no problem with all this. He anoints my head with oil and my cup overruns. No problem. It's a beautiful part of the chapter. He prepares a table for me in the presence of my enemies. We all want to shame our enemies, isn't it? We have no problem with that passage, or that particular aspect of the chapter. That though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. That's where the problem begins. If he is a good, great, and chief shepherd, he who watches his people, who does not sleep nor slumber, with all authority vested in him, why should he lead his sheep in the valley? Why should they be exposed to heart-rending circumstances that forces them to retreat, to fear, and sometimes to even question his presence like we do today? I want to propose before you 3 reasons why there has to be a valley for the sheep to go to. Reason number 1 is that higher ground, the summit of the mountain, can only be attained through the valley. I spent about 8 years of my ministry in Southern Province. And I have been to places that are all mountainous. A terrain that has no flat land, you deal with mountains. If you are to go to the top of the mountain, you begin from the foot of the mountain. And the foot of the mountain is entrenched in the valley. The valley makes the basis of climbing up. Many of us desire higher ground. My heart has no desire to stay here where doubts arise. You know the song. Pressing on the upward way. I want to be on higher ground. But I want to remind you that higher ground is not attained by sudden lift. All of a sudden you find yourself on top of the mountain. You need to go through the valley. My heart has no desire to stay where doubts arise and fears dismay. Though some may dwell where these abound, my prayer, my aim is higher ground. That's what the hymn writer says. Lord, lift me up, and I shall stand by faith on heaven's stable land. A higher plane that I have found, Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. My beloved friends, airlifting to higher ground is not sudden. To get to the summit, to the peripheral, to the top of the mountain, to enjoy the sun rays and bask in fresh breeze, you need to go through the valley. That is why, beloved, the people that are so fine, that are so successful, they have their valleys. They can simply trace their record, their background, to the things that have made them to be where they are. To be in the valley, it's unpleasant. Who even likes it, by the way? Things are bad. You are broke. You are sick. People backbite you. Things fall apart. Your family, affairs are not in the best shape. Who even likes that kind of stuff? Disease and all such kind of things. But beloved, it is from these unpleasant experiences that we are made, that we are thoroughly baked. Somebody says, good people are not born. Good people are made. Those with tough skin, those who have actually known to reason and cannot be intimidated by circumstances of luck, are those who've been in the valley before. So if you're going to be a visa in Egypt, you must first go into the pit like Joseph. If you're going to be a prophet of God like Amos, you must first be a cup-bearer. If you're going to be a missionary to the nations, you must begin by preaching by the wayside. You must begin with the small congregations. You want to be a successful businessman, you need to be acquainted with loss. You need to be acquainted with trickery and fraud and being on the end of use and abuse by selfish people. This is the valley that God uses to make his own people. Second reason why God must lead his sheep in the valley is that the valley is actually the only place that provides the best and the fresh watermarks and paths. I told you I have pastored in places that are mountainous. The last place that I pastored in is actually in the Zambezi escarpment. It's all a mountain range. It's the second lowest point here in Zambia. It's all hot. Most of the trees are actually gray instead of green, because they are scorched by the sun literally every day. And you can hardly find shade. I remember one time we were going for baptism. A senior minister came to help me, with the baptisms. And then we had actually, a tire burst, of our motorbike right in the mountains. Where we were going far, and where we were coming from, it was far. And there we were stuck, no water to drink, no food, and the sun was scorching right on our heads. In the valley, as we descended the mountain, as if unbelievable, we began to see shades of green. When we got there were springs of water. What happens is the surface water, as it dries up, it all goes to collect by the foot of the mountain. In the valleys and in the dens, you go right in the mountains, you find well-watered land. You find the finest of the water, fresh water. And God knows, if you and I are to be well-nourished and refreshed and restored, valley. And when we are being taken to the valley, you may be tempted to start cursing God and wondering and asking why. But God leads you down to go and refresh you, to go and restore you. The Road Development Agency, RDA, when they build a road, for example, and after that road has been tarred and motorists are now excited, it's all vroom, speeding after speed. You know what they do? When accidents are being recorded, they will go there and put a hump. And the reason they go and put a hump is that you are forced to slow down when you get there. The hump to protect you and to protect also the civilians. Beloved of God, I submit before you the richest feed, reason number 3, and the best forage for the grazing of the sheep in the valley. You want God to make you into a child that He wants you to be. The valley, as bitter as it may be and pleasant as it may seem, but the valley is for your greatest good. God does not look at your temporal needs, your temporal aspirations, your temporal convenience and comfort. God has your destiny in mind, and God allows certain things to come as a way of bringing out the best out of us. Yes, my beloved friends. Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 2 to 3. And you shall remember the Lord, O your God, who led you the way all these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble you and to test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep His commandments or not. So He humbled you and allowed you to hunger and fed you with living bread, which you did not know, nor your fathers know about, that He might make you know that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. May I quickly remind you of the confessions of people who've been in the valley before. Joseph, who had been betrayed by his brothers, sold to the Ishmaelites, may have been going to Egypt, downcast and wondering where his God was. Fast forward, many years passed, Joseph would confess, as far as I am concerned, Joseph would say, God turned into good what you meant for evil, for He brought me to this high position I have today so that I could save many. Talking about the disciples who were called to leave their former lives and their occupations and their families and their comfort simply to become fishers of men. After 3 years of walking with Jesus, sacrificing, Jesus would ask them, when I called you, did you lack anything? They replied, we lacked nothing. Paul had a thorn in the flesh. He would confirm that all this was given to him, that the glory of God should be revealed in him. Joshua would confess, now I am about to go the way of the earth. You know with your heart and soul that not one promise of God has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. And the Apostle Paul, who would confirm, I know in whom I have believed, that He will keep that which I have committed to Him. Beloved of God, the valley does not mean that you're going to stay there. The valley is simply an experience in time for the purposes that God alone has in mind, not to kill you, but to refresh you, to restore you, to bless you, and God's purpose to be filled in your life. Stay calm. God is in control. Shall we pray? Eternal, loving Father, what a soothing thought that you are the great shepherd of your flock, of your pasture. That we are not here on our own and things do not happen on their own. But that God, you are in charge. Through your wisdom and unsearchable providence, you allow things that perplex us to occur, but solely at your command and at your will. It is our prayer today that teach us to wait upon you and teach us to trust you when we do not have all the answers we need. We do pray that you bless us even as we reflect that we are the sheep of your pasture. This we do pray and ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
I hope you were blessed with the message that came, a message of hope, a message that tells us that even in valleys, there is still hope and comfort. Above all, God is ever present with us. Thank you so much, Pastor, for that timely message that has come to us. And this afternoon, we are inviting you yet for another power-packed program, a Bible study, a well-interactive Bible study. Please, we invite you to come back and listen to this Bible study to be blessed more. May the good Lord be with you. Stay safe and keep hope alive.